I learned something really important last night. And it was a result of having a conversation that was both challenging and uncomfortable. And it actually required me to, before I proceeded to continue and finish the conversation, I had to humble myself. It was very uncomfortable. This is a conversation that I was having with my sweetheart, and it was all about the exploration of empathic tendencies and highly attuning to people's energies and emotions, which is something that empaths are very used to, right? There were moments of laughter, there were moments of insight and realization, and what I saw in myself is that I look for how other people see me and how other people think about me. And it's like automatic. It's like autopilot. Like the most fascinating thing about it last night was it was like every step that I was taking, I was prompting myself to, well, actually, no. My sweetheart was prompting me to, like, ask myself questions, to, like, go further into myself. And every step that I was trying to take brought me back to familiarity. And the familiarity is that sense of tuning into other people and their emotions and their energy. And usually the way that it manifests is the question of, how do you see me? Because I need to know how you see me, because that's how I'm going to see me. How do you feel about me? Because I need to know how you feel about me, because that's how I'm going to feel about me, right? It's very challenging for empaths, I would argue in general, but specifically, oftentimes me, it's very challenging for me to bring myself back to myself. Especially when I'm trying to gain self from other. This is what I've talked about before, the matter of codependency and enmeshment, right? There is the loss of self and the gain of self. The loss of self is the aspect of self-abandonment. The gain of self is the gaining externally from other people perception of you through them. How do you see me? Because that's how I'm going to see me, right? What I learned as a result of last night's conversation is that it's actually challenging for me. And I just learned something new in this moment now, too. There's an element of selfishness. It's very challenging. There's a belief that having wants and needs is selfish. Yep, that makes sense. Trauma will do that to you. It's automatic for me. It's familiar and comfortable for me to seek self in other people. Whenever I try to step outside of that, I will find myself taking steps in a direction that I think is bringing myself back to myself, when really what's happening is I find myself asking another question that would suggest that I am tuning myself to other people. It's wild. It's almost like it's challenging to walk away from. And of course, that makes sense, you know? There are things that we become comfortable with and familiar with that can actually be very challenging for us to walk away from. This being one of them, of course. If you don't learn to walk, you won't be able to run. If I don't learn to bring my energy and awareness back to myself and into my body, I'll never know what it is that I truly need from myself, for myself, and from other people for me, right? And that's the other thing too. When you tune out of the self and you tune into other or others, you are by default taking your sense of awareness away from yourself, obviously. So you're disconnecting yourself from your intuition. It's wild. There's a big part of me that identifies as the good guy, that wants to approach everything from a good guy standpoint and be very careful. I would never, like, openly, intentionally intend, both the same word. I would never intend to, like, be indecent to somebody or to treat somebody poorly. However, that doesn't mean that the extent to which I have been a nice guy throughout my life has been absurd. So much so to the extent that I abandon self, I don't communicate my wants. Forget about not communicating wants and needs. I just invalidated myself. Forget about communicating wants and needs is a very important thing. And it's important to be able to know the self and know the wants and needs. I haven't previously been able to communicate my wants and needs because I haven't been in touch with them. Why? I've been very tuned out of myself and tuned into other people. Makes sense. Empathic tendencies 101. Now let's look at this a little bit further too. Why is it challenging for somebody to tune into themselves? They don't like what they see. Imagine you were to open your window and you see a massive tornado outside. You're gonna run and hide. It's very challenging to look at the self when you don't like what you see. Especially if what you see is an unstable and unstructured self. If there's nothing to walk on outside and I'm going to fall into infinity and eternity and eternity, why would I walk outside? That's the other thing too about empaths, is that to an extent they don't really know themselves. They spend so much time tuning into everyone else. How are you gonna know yourself if you're hardly ever tuned into yourself? Right? It's a very real issue. Having the capacity to tune into other people is not bad or good or right or wrong. Quite honestly, and it's kind of strange for me to say this, but it's actually a deeply beautiful experience. Being empathic and being present with somebody else and their energies and their emotions, it's a wonderful experience. That is, of course, boundaried. Because if you don't approach it from a boundaried standpoint, you're going to lose yourself. And there's a good chance that you're going to get hurt. Because when a lack of boundaries or permeable boundaries are present, it leads to a whole lot of violation and invading of porous holes that lead to the vulnerabilities of a human. Vulnerable, open wound. If you put something that's not supposed to be on that open wound, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna sting. What could you put? Words that are not decent. There's nothing wrong with being empathic and being highly attuned. It's actually a superpower. The other fucking superpower is knowing how to turn it off and when. Which, turning it off has to do with boundaries. But there is nothing wrong with being highly attuned to people's emotions. It's actually an incredible art and craft. And if you can do it in a way where you create a space for people, in other words, hold space for them, and you can be present with their emotions, and you can listen to them, and you can feel, right? It's powerful. It's a beautiful thing. However, if you lose and gain self, lose self-abandon, gain self from other, how you see me is how I see me, how you feel about me is how I feel about me, that's problematic. So how do you heal these things? You heal by remembering that there's nothing wrong with being empathic. Being highly attuned to people's emotions is a superpower. Yes, absolutely. And quite honestly, I would argue that, trying to step away from the splitting the black and white thinking, but I would argue that it's a good thing. It becomes an even better thing when you can do it with boundaries.